Hello and welcome. I'm Stephanie Valdez and I'm the co-owner of Community Bookstore. Tonight, Stacey Abrams joins us to discuss her novel, While Justice Sleeps with Anne Curry. This program is in collaboration with Congregation Beth Elohim. And we just found out that While Justice Sleeps, this is my galley, is hitting the New York Times bestseller list at #1. So congratulations to Stacey. I'm going to welcome Rabbi Timoner of Congregation Beth Elohim to greet you, and then I'll be back to introduce our guests.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm actually on vacation, but I had to pop in to be here tonight to thank Anne and Stacey so much for coming to be with our community. Stacey, I need to tell you that you are, I think we might have the most ardent and active fan base you have anywhere. And I know you've got fans everywhere, so there's a lot of competition for that. But this is a community that loves you. I've seen this community, thousands of people do everything in their power to raise money, give money, volunteer in every possible way for your work and the work of organizations like yours. And in this last year, especially. And I also wanted you to know about us that when Donald Trump was elected, we opened our sanctuary doors to what ended up being 10,000 Brooklyn residents over the course of that year to build a resistance movement for democracy and for human rights. It was called Get Organized Brooklyn. And we were supposed to be hosting you in our sanctuary last June. We were so looking forward to that, but of course the pandemic made that impossible. But we're hoping that someday we'll have a rain check and be able to host you in our 1,300 person sanctuary. It will be standing room only. And we want to be able to talk to you about democracy and all of the work you do that we are so proud of and believe in so much. So mostly I just wanted to say thank you for being here tonight. And I know that though this was just about nonfiction, we're here to talk about fiction, and I'll turn it over to Stephanie, who will introduce both you and Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, even on your vacation, Rabbi Timoner. Now, for some quick housekeeping, you should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. If you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button here at the bottom of the screen to submit them. We'll ask some of your questions at the end of the program. We've also enabled live auto-transcribed closed captioning for this event. So if your Zoom is updated, you can enable that from the live transcription button on your screen. And finally, we've scheduled a whole host of spring programming, which you can find on our website. For instance, on June 3rd, Ocean Vuong will join us for the paperback release of On Earth, We Are Briefly Gorgeous. Now I'll tell you a bit about tonight's guests and we'll get started. Stacey Abrams is the two-time New York Times bestselling author of Our Time Is Now and Lead from the Outside, an entrepreneur and a political leader. A tax attorney by training, she served 11 years in the Georgia House of Representatives, 7 as minority leader, and became the 2018 Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia, where she won more votes than any other Democrat in the state's history. She has launched multiple organizations devoted to voting rights, training, and hiring young people of color, and tackling social issues at the state, national, and international levels. She is the founder of Fair Fight, Fair Count, and the Southern Economic Advancement Project. Abrams is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations and sits on the advisory board of Climate Power 2020 and the advocacy board of the Women's National Basketball Players Association. She has received law degrees from Spelman College, the LBG School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, and Yale Law School. She'll be in conversation tonight with award-winning journalist and photojournalist Anne Curry, who's a former NBC News Network anchor and international correspondent. She's reported on conflicts in all sorts of places: Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and more. She also has won several awards for journalism, including 7 National News Emmys and many Edward R. Murrow Awards, among others. And now I'll turn things over to you, Stacey and Anne. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hi, Stacey. Delighted to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. And I want to join you in thanking Stephanie, and thank you, Rabbi Timoner, for having me. And thank you, Anne Curry, for gracing us with your presence and being willing to lead this conversation.
As we know, everyone here is here to see you, Stacey. So let's begin. I want to say that we can almost, reading this book that you've written, we can almost see the twinkle in your eye because this book is dense. in subject matter and rich in characters, but at its core, it's a story about a brilliant woman who knows the law and she bravely fights for justice to protect others against enormous odds. And yes, that is like you, Stacy, but she's also a heroine into herself. And so after all the years since you began writing While Justice Sleeps, the rejections, the knowing how rare it is to read about a heroine such as this, what is the feeling seeing that she exists in a book that just hit #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list?
It's extraordinary. And if I didn't know my mother was listening, I may use a 4-letter expletive. My mother and father are both pastors, so I've got to be very careful. And I do know other words, but this.
Well, I think you should be allowed. I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, and I'm sure because your mother is not only a former pastor, she's a former librarian, and you grew up reading and you loved reading and slept in the stacks at some point. You were talking about, and just to be able to read this character, to see her, and to see her now she's going to be read by so many. It's got to hit deep.
It really does. I mean, it's truly gratifying because she's the character I created 10 years ago when I did the edits to bring the story current for, the 21st century. Although, I wrote it in 2010, but to bring it up to speed to 2020, I had to change the type of phone she held. And there are a couple of other pieces. Some folks from DC pointed out that the places I knew DC to be back in 2010 are now gentrified and they're different. And I didn't quite update all of those pieces, but what has remained true throughout the story is who Avery is. And being able to write a character that I didn't feel compelled to change or update, to me signals that I wrote a character who can continue to live and resonate. And that is an amazing feeling.
And what also resonates is her journey. I mean, you challenge the reader along with Avery Keene, this heroine, to very quickly solve a mind-bending puzzle requiring deep knowledge about chess, to try to figure out what connects this comatose Supreme Court justice, a corrupt president, and this international conspiracy that involves sort of deadly genetic research. And at the same time, Avery, it seems, our heroine, is also at the same time falling in love. So it does seem that there is a storyline here that indicates that, you kind of refuse to be bored, Stacy.
I do not suffer boredom well, and I have a very deep curiosity. My parents, I'm the second of 6 kids, and when we used to joke in our family, when they told you to go look it up, it wasn't rhetorical. This was, my mother was a research librarian. Not only was she a librarian, she was a college librarian whose specialty was research. So when she said, look it up, you had no choice. And that just, for me, led to this deep yearning. When I want to know something, I want to be able to dive deep. And then because of my dad, who is just an amazing storyteller, being able to take what I know and put it into a form that's accessible and fun, but that still has, texture and context. I'm just so delighted that, I've got my mom's brain and my dad's brain kind of mixing up in there. And these are the things that come out.
Well, and I think to your point, I mean, because as fast paced as this book is, it also offers, pretty a lot of details, perhaps more than might be expected, about the history of chess, the variances in haplogroups, and even apparently military-grade cyber intelligence. So it does kind of speak to a kind of what you're talking about. I would go maybe a little further. I would say maybe it suggests that you have nerdy tendencies, that that you're really, and so what does it say about what kinds of things fascinate you, and why is it that you wanted these details in the book? Because I actually learned something, and I think readers would.
I love writing stories that require you to think about something you hadn't encountered before. And I think it's incumbent upon the writer to do so in a way that an expert will know you're not an expert, but will respect your attempt, and that a layperson believes that it could be real. And so even if I'm going to stretch the bounds of what's possible, I have to start with an authentic core. But the other piece for me is I love knowing new things. It makes me happy and excited. And I'm, as I mentioned, I'm the second of 6 kids. And I talk about the fact that when I was writing about haplogroups, I was able to sort of shape what I thought. And then I called my sister, the anthropologist, and said, okay, does this make sense? When I'm creating a hemorrhagic fever and I need to figure out the incubation period, I called my little sister from the CDC. I'm like, does this work? I'm doing something with Avery and she's having a conversation. I call my sister who's a judge. I'm killing people and I call my brothers. I'm like, does this make sense? And this scene, does it resonate? And I have this amazing family that helped to sharpen my sense of what I knew. But even more importantly, I thought it would be fun for readers to get to explore all of these other things. And the last thing I'll say is I wanted to create stakes that were so high that it made sense that all of the other things followed. There's some thrillers that I think underestimate the capacity of the reader to follow complexity, and therefore you deny them the tension that has to happen. Mm-hmm. And so my mission was really to calibrate this, make it complex enough that a Supreme Court justice and a president would be implicated, but not make it so unreachable that you give up out of exhaustion and you're like, never mind, I don't want to read this book because I don't want to know anything else.
Mm. And you do have very, very high stakes, and going all the way up to the president of the United States. And you talked about revising, or not revising, but sort of updating the book before it was published. And so I guess the obvious question, because in your book, the US president is a real scammer. He is a seriously bad, smarmy character. So I think it's fair to ask, was any of your writing about the president inspired by any real life president in particular?
No, this book was written before 2010, or by 2010. I mean, I will certainly say that I grew up in the time of the Iran-Contra scandal. I remember the Gulf War. So I grew up sort of formatively understanding that presidents are fallible and that they will take these flyers into international space. I have read almost everything ever written about LBJ. So I'm not surprised by the ability of a president to have clay feet or to make decisions that are deeply problematic. But the personal character of this president did not anticipate the last 4 years of our lives.
So even the section where Avery gets to give the president a piece of her mind.
That was just anticipatory.
I want to go a little further into what we talked about with detail, because there is something really kind of wonderful. I noticed that your attention to detail carries into your descriptions. I was reading, and I've written it down here, on page 88, you describe a squat brown apartment building with a stringy lawn struggling against weeds. Dark patches showed where foot traffic ignored the broken flagstones leading to the main walk. Some hopeful neighbor had hung a pot filled with irises from the overhang. Shabby fought with desperate and managed to stay in the fight. How in the intensity of your life, not only do you find time to write, but how do you find time to observe the stories even by inanimate objects?
I will say that is a lovely question. I appreciate it. I write because I love to tell stories, but I also want to be in that space. As a reader, I want to be where you are taking me. I don't want to have to see the movie or watch the television show. I want to be able to be there myself. And that requires a care with description. There are some writers who would say that in a thriller, that's too much, that it's overwrought. But for me, the goal is I want you to be able to smell and see and feel, and to believe if you stumble across a space that this is where it could be. And I hope that the translation to screen, I'm privileged, if I'm privileged enough for it to make it all the way through the process, that it holds that to be true. But I don't want you to have to rely on your whole imagining. I want to give you enough texture and context. But it's also real and true that our lives are animated not just by the people we meet, but by the places where we are. I mean, when I came into the conversation, when I joined the pre-Zoom, you were describing these moments, and it is so critical that we experience the whole of a space, not just the people inside it, but what made that space possible and what that space struggles to be or struggles against. And that, as much as anything else, informs who we are when we enter. If you walk into a beautiful, pristine home, you're going to expect certain things. And if you walk into a place that looks decrepit, your expectations change. And my mission is to challenge that, not in an overbearing way, but in a way that just sort of nudges you to think differently about what's happening, but to also give you a sense of how what happens inside is situated by what you see first.
It's like keeping the door open, or as you've talked about in your own experience, going to the governor's mansion after becoming a valedictorian, keeping the gate open, keeping our doors open to each other. So we actually see each other and not the things around us. And I think that's something that is an important message today. You mentioned, though, as it translates to the screen. So I've got to ask you, I know you're a fan of John Grisham and Scott Turow, at least I read as such, so correct me if I'm wrong. So if that's true, then it had to have been a true joy when Turow wrote that he considers While Justice Sleeps, quote, a first-class legal thriller favorably compared with Grisham's The Pelican Brief. And so I was thinking about this, thinking, Julia Roberts played Grisham's lead in that movie. So who should be your leads in the TV series that's being made about your book, which you found out about just recently? I'm thinking Zendaya as Avery, maybe Christopher Walken as Justice Wynn, and maybe Donald Sutherland as President Stokes. You want to fight me on this?
I don't want to fight you on it. Here's what I'm saying. I'm just close enough to Hollywood to know that my opinion matters, but only so much. But I will certainly take it under advisement and send it up the chain.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have some say at any rate, but it must be fun to think about, watching what you created come actually into not just to fruition. I mean, it's like giving birth in some ways. It's like creating something from nothing and having it be a connection is kind of its own way, a way of opening that door, opening that gate. Yes?
Yeah, and it's a marvelous opportunity to have an excuse to visit other places without having to leave your home. And I know in the midst of COVID, that sounds absolutely absurd, but wow. As a writer, being able to adventure forth, to be in the character of others, and to get to experience something new is just it. I get the question sometimes, are you a writer? Are you a politician? I am all of those things. And in part, each of them informs and I think enhances the other. And to be able to write, to be able to open that door, to be able to create these worlds that people get really they get very energized about. That is the most marvelous thing possible, because when people take your character seriously, when they will fight you about it, you've done your job.
I'm watching the clock. We still have some time. So let me ask you a few quick fire questions for your quick fire answers. Favorite book?
Don't have one. I have lots of favorite books.
One of your favorite books?
One of my favorite books, I will say today, I'll give you The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. Okay.
So this speaks to a reader. Best thing your mother ever taught you?
She told me she said, you can be a jack of all trades, but a master of none, which she was telling me was to not do too many things. What I heard was master all the things you want to do.
Including being a novelist and a politician, a leader, an activist. Okay. So best thing your father ever taught you?
He said, never tell yourself no, let everyone else do it, but never tell yourself no.
Is this where you think you got your willingness to stand firm? Is it from your father? No matter what anybody else is saying about you, you just stand firm. That seems to be one of the characteristics about you that people have we all talk about, that we see in you.
My dad has an extraordinary stubbornness about when he believes that something is just or unjust, he is going to be stubborn about it. My mom is going to be smart about it. And I tried to merge those two things always. But yes, it's master your trade and don't tell yourself no, let somebody else do it.
Any doubts about running again for governor of Georgia?
I haven't decided, so there's nothing to doubt right now.
Okay, and I would like to ask you this question, and you can do with it whatever you want. But you've been honest about the scope of your ambition to be president of the United States, and you've said that you feel a responsibility to say yes for every young woman, every person of color who sees you and decides what they're capable of. Based on what you think you're capable of. But you've also done this TED Talk talking about, what, to make your own decisions about what, when you make a decision, ask yourself, why do you want it? What must you do with your life? So talk to me about that, talk to us about that in this frame of this openness, this honesty about your ambition to be president of the United States. Why do you want it? What must you do?
I believe that poverty is immoral. I think it's a waste of human capital, and I find it anathema that in our society we allow justice to be sublimated and suppressed so often. If I can figure out how to solve that at another level, there is nothing better than to be the president of the United States and be able to populate a nation with that ethos. That's why I want
it. And that speaks to perhaps the studying that you did a lot of studying about LBJ, who of course made big strides in this way. Is that the connection there?
It is. Well, LBJ for a couple of reasons. One is that he did such extraordinary things for civil rights, for justice, for voting rights, for poverty. But he was a virulent racist, and he lied to the people he served, and he made such deep mistakes. And I wanted to learn from someone who I think is one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, and someone who has made some of the worst mistakes a politician can make. The ability to situate both of those things in a single person and to understand the through line that created him, it's an opportunity to know what you should do, know what you shouldn't do, and to create markers for yourself so you can tell when you start to list too close to the edge and when you start to justify your own behavior based on the power that you have. Because ultimately that's what happens. People get afraid of losing power and they make terrible decisions to justify holding on. And that's part of the through line of While Justice Sleeps. And for me, as someone who entered politics, I was always very conscious of how do good people make such terrible mistakes? And sometimes it's because they haven't thought about it. They don't know why they're there. So that when the question of what you should do comes up, you make really horrific choices that in the moment might make sense to you, but in the context cannot make sense unless you never knew what the context was.
And a lot of this goes to motivation. You talk about this through line, talks about what are you able to hang on to the purity of your motivation, or do you let it get muddied up? So let me, since I have a few more minutes before we'd like to get to questions, let me just ask you this, and it's sort of an odd question, so forgive me, but it's because your focus is on service, this idea of doing something about poverty, and this is one of the big reasons why your why would be what you must do in terms of what you must do in terms of why you're ambitious to be president of the United States. My father taught me that to do something of some service for others with your life is how you know on your last day, as you breathe your last breath, that it mattered that you were born. So if I may, let me ask you, what above all, you talked about these issues and in addition to this book, what above all do you hope you will be able to feel about what you've done, what you've accomplished with your life?
For me, it's not what I accomplished. It is to know that regardless of the outcome that I tried, I was raised to believe that if you see a problem, your job is to try to fix it. You can complain about it, you can vetch about it, but you've got to try to do something about it. And as long as I know I've tried, I cannot hold myself accountable for fixing things that have been broken for millennia, but I can hold myself accountable for spending my time on this earth doing my very best to make it better.
Well, that's the definition of an upstander. So we can call you that. We can also call you a novelist and so many other things. The book is entitled While Justice Sleeps. Stacey Abrams, it's been so fun talking to you. I would keep going, but I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. And if we run out of questions, Stephanie, I certainly have more to ask. So now let's invite back community bookstore Stephanie Valdez who's going to help us with the audience questions, and I'll hang out to help follow up. Stephanie?
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks so much to you both. I think we'll have some echo on the screen. Everyone hear this echo? And
I hear it. I turned down my volume a little bit.
okay, well, we'll see if it goes away. Does writing nonfiction, someone says, does writing nonfiction hold any appeal, or do you particularly enjoy the world of creating fiction? You've written both.
Yes.
Do you have is there one that you enjoy writing more or that you favor?
Not at all. In fact, my very first novel, Rules of Engagement, I was writing it at the exact same time I was writing my treatise on the operational dissonance of the unrelated business income tax exemption. And for me, both parts were equally exciting, slightly one more exciting than the other. I'll let you guess which one, but they are both parts of who I am. And it's always been important to me because of how I was raised, because of who I want to be, that I never give primacy to one over the other. What I have to be careful about is to make sure always that I'm a storyteller who respects the truth in my nonfiction, and that I am a storyteller who respects the creative in my fiction. And that both pieces, that because I try to do so much in my fiction, that I'm always very thoughtful about my research, and because I'm usually talking about things that people find stultifyingly boring, that I'm interesting enough in my nonfiction that they want to make it through. They want to know what I know. And for me, both of those pieces are equally important, and they feed both sides of my soul.
So interesting. Where did the seed of this book come from? Was it a character, a scene, or was it something else?
It was a lunch. I'm a tax attorney by training. I started at this amazing firm in Georgia, and one of the first Black women to ever be a partner at a major law firm was one of my mentors at my firm. And she also helped me navigate being a tax attorney who was writing romance novels while I was practicing law, which was an unusual thing at my firm. And when I left, I went off to the city to be a deputy city attorney, and then I ran for office. She and I friends, and we were having lunch one day in 2008, and near the end of lunch she said, I've been thinking about you. There's this idea, there's this thing in the Constitution. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. And I was like, what? And she said, you know that in the Constitution, the only people who have a lifetime appointment, there is absolutely no mechanism for removing them from office if they can't do their jobs. Unless they commit a crime or die, they've got permanent employment. She's like, the president, you can take him out with the 25th Amendment. If it's a congressperson, you just unelect them. But a judge, it's just there. And I could not stop thinking about it. And when I got home that night, I was thinking, what if a swing justice on the Supreme Court fell into a coma, a persistent vegetative state? And I wrote the very first scene with Howard Wynn, and that scene has not changed. It has always been the opening scene. It's how I came to discover Avery being the protagonist, and how I created the other foils, but it started with Justice Wynn. And her name is Teresa Wynn Roseborough. And so Chief Justice Teresa Roseborough and Howard Wynn are both named after her because she's that awesome and that central to this book's existence.
That's amazing, especially since it sounds like you worked on the book over a number of years, just to have the catalyst be there in the first go. Let's see. On the other hand, were there any scenes or characters that didn't make it into the book that you loved but had to go?
Yes. So I've complained about this a little bit. So one of my brothers, Richard, I had him read a draft of it, and there was this car scene, the car chase that I really enjoyed. And he said, it's slowing down. It's going to slow down the reader. It doesn't really add anything. Get rid of it. I'm like, I don't want to. I like it. I'm also a political junkie, and I had a whole chapter that dealt with the tensions around what would happen if they tried to pack the court. So if in the book, you'll meet the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and they had their own chapter, so I could spend more time on the politics. And that was also jettisoned because apparently it was only interesting to me.
That's funny. I'm sure so many authors share the same feeling that like a beloved chapter had to go in the last edits. What prompted you to use your name on this book instead of a nom de plume this time?
So I only ever used it because when I started writing, it was 2000. So I wrote the book between 98 and 99. And I was also, as I said, writing this tax work. Google was just a thing. It had just started. And a friend of mine called and said, there's this thing called Google, put your name into it. And, back then getting on the computer was you had to wait for dial-up to work. And so by the time I got through it, I put my name in and up popped this article I'd written in high school on Mesopotamian astronomy that was in the college journal, because at the time I thought I'd be a physicist. Anyway, the fact that came up was very jarring to me, because it meant that if I were to write romance and tax policy, there is the possibility that someone would essentially think that that Alan Greenspan was writing my romance novels. That did not seem like the best sales tactic. And so I gave myself a nom de plume for my romance, because you really can't publish tax policy under a pseudonym. So, Selena got to have romance, Stacy got to have tax policy. These days, everyone knows all the things about me, because Google is even more of an uber force in our lives. And so it was fine time to merge them, and they become one. But my name was always in my books, and my picture was in every single one of my romance novels.
So you weren't really hiding anyway.
Oh, not at all.
It was just practical.
Exactly. It was brand identity, although I did not know that was the term of art to use.
Are you working on another book now?
I am working on a couple of things, and I am hopeful that by tomorrow I will have a clear line of sight on what I am going to be able to do. But I am always writing. In between doing some things, there's this democracy thing I'm working on, and yeah.
Other things in between your writing.
Yeah,
for sure. Let's see. What other questions do you want to ask?
Well, are you writing, just as you're looking for questions, have you begun writing your second book about Avery Keene yet? And when do you, and if so, I understand that you've already agreed to do so, is that right?
Avery Keene is likely to make another appearance. I loved her. I think she's a fantastic character, and I really want to know what happens next. So I believe there will be another Avery Keene novel in the offing.
In fact, you wrote this first book with a couple of little bits at the end that could be tied up. So I think that's just right. I'm waiting for that. All right. Any more questions then? Stephanie.
A classic bookish question, which is, what is your writing routine? Where does writing fit in your life?
So I believe in work-life Jenga, which is something I made up. But the whole point is, there are all these different pieces to me, and parts of a day, parts of a week, parts of a year. And so I have to focus on the thing that has to get done most urgently, and then the thing that is important to me. Writing is usually important but not urgent unless I'm under a contract, in which case either I have to give them a book or they need their money back, and the money's gone, so I've got to write the book. So my writing is that my process is that I usually set aside a certain number of days. I know how many days it will take me to write a book generally, because I know how many words I can write in a day. I will set aside that number of days plus a buffer number of days for the days I'd say I'm going to write and I'm just not going to do it. And I give myself usually 5 to 7 of those. Before I write the first, I'll write like a scene just so I can set it in my head. But before I sit down to write the full story, I do a synopsis where I tell myself, here's just in a few paragraphs, here's the beginning, middle, and end of the story. I then do storyboards where I actually lay out each chapter to make sure I know how I'm going to get from the beginning to the end. I do any research I need to do. so that I feel comfortable starting to write, knowing that I might have to stop in the middle if I make something up or if a character does something I wasn't expecting. And then every day that I give myself to write, I write usually a chapter. I will usually only write a chapter. I won't try to do 2 or 3. And that then gives me time to just decompress. I'll go back through and read it a couple of times. I don't do a lot of, I'm not someone who goes back every time and rereads every single line. I know what I was writing, and I'll fix the things I need to clean up. And then I get to the end of my set times. My books are done. I do not wake up like every morning at 6 a.m. to write. I do not have a routine other than I need a computer. I need some nice instrumental music. I need tea, and I need an idea. Other than that, I'm good.
It sounds as though, I mean, Jennifer, it looks like you're looking for more questions. So let me just ask. I mean, it sounds as though you are exceptionally good at compartmentalizing your time. And when you think about the diversity of things that you focus on, worrying about voter suppression, worrying about the democracy, thinking about how to lead the future, what's happening, and then also thinking of tax policies, and then thinking about writing these very fast-paced thrillers. I mean, I'm wondering, as things are coming together in your life, you are now known, people are seeing you, as the New York Times writes, as containing multitudes. Do you think it might get harder?
I think it will be more, there's more pressure not to fail across the board. Writing a crappy book is not something I think I can really withstand. But it's less about the public pressure of it than my internal pressure to not, you don't want to believe your own hype, and you don't want to be so taken with yourself that you forget that your responsibility is to be good at all of these things. Back to my mom's point about, you don't want to be a jack of all trades. I don't want to dabble. If I'm going to do it, I need to do it well. And so there is the pressure of making sure I only agree to the things I can do well, that I'm more discerning about my capacity, my timing, and that I've sloughed off the things that were not necessarily enriching to me or anyone else. But it also requires then that I give myself permission to do the things I want to do, that let me decompress, that let me be creative, because it's hard. It's hard to do all of these pieces, not hard because they're all difficult, but hard because I want to do them all well. And my standards for being successful are internal and high, in that I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to write something substandard, but I also want to be proud of who I am and what I do. And I think it's more of an internal pressure than it is anything external.
I hope you think about making yourself proud of yourself more than you care about what other people think. And I think that's probably really true for you.
It is. The remarkable thing about the family I grew up in is that you never get to take yourself that seriously. Like, my siblings are proud of me, but they really don't care. Like, in the sense that, I'm still me, and, my older sister will still tell me what to do. It doesn't really matter. But it's also important because if you do things you love, you want to do those things well. And I describe myself as having an A- B+ personality. Like, I'm not an A+ personality. I'm not that driven. I am very driven, but I'm driven just enough that I'll watch some TV. I'm good.
How are we doing for more questions? I don't want to keep going. I can keep going, Stephanie, but if there are more questions from the audience, let's give them preference.
We have a lot.
Oh, good. Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, and please never apologize for asking questions. You're really quite good at it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. But I want to give the audience who've come to, who are so excited to hear from you, I want to give them a chance. So I misunderstood. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, Marjorie Rothenberg says you practically saved democracy for the 21st century, and you write fiction. Do you ever have downtime, or just hang out? And if so, how do you use that downtime? What's your fun side hobby to your side hobby of writing books?
I love television. I love reading. I love pop culture. And so I am a voracious reader, but I am also a very voracious consumer of scripted television. I don't really like reality TV because I like my people to be turned on and turned off. And I want I want to know what the plot is. I don't want it to be revealed to me. And so I love television. It makes me very happy. And it's one of those things that I've never understood people who say, oh, it's my guilty pleasure. I don't feel guilty about being happy. I enjoy TV. It makes me very happy.
And why the title Justice? I had a couple questions about the title.
When I wrote the first scene, it was probably, I was on chapter 3 when I decided it was going to be While Justice Sleeps. It was, of course, a double entendre. I've got a Supreme Court justice who falls asleep. But if you think about all of the things that are unraveling in the book and that are being revealed, justice is clearly napping on some of the things that need to be happening in society. And for me, it's that tension of Avery having to seek justice when all the people around who have the power to make things right are making decisions that don't necessarily serve justice's cause.
Great. So we have a lot of political questions. So
It's okay.
we won't hit you too hard on your book tour, but Daniel Schwartz-Narbonne says, you mentioned the democracy thing. What is the most important action we can take as citizens?
I encourage everyone to go to stopjimcrow2.com. It's stopjimcrow2.com. The bills that are being pushed in state legislatures across the country, we now have more than 400 bills in more than 47 state legislatures that are designed to perpetuate the big lie, but worse, they are designed to perpetuate the insurrection. And if we remember the core of the insurrection, it was that people who stormed the Capitol believed the wrong people had a voice in our democracy, the wrong people got to vote. And that is anathema to who we should be. And so we have seen bills passed in Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Florida. There's now a new set of bills moving through Ohio and Michigan with the real likelihood of passage. But the thing is, in all of those states, we were either able to mitigate some of those bills. In Texas, there were 12 bills that just didn't make it through. We have been able to build a legislative record that we believe can help us in court. But what is most important, and what the other side that is perpetuating this work, what they want us to do is to stop talking about it. Voter suppression is most effective when it operates in silence. And the demise of democracy occurred when people stop believing they have the right to speak up. Because voter suppression is not just the act of impeding your ability to cast a vote, it's your ability to convince people that their right to vote isn't real, that it's not worth the effort, that it is not worth the fight. And what I've tried to do for the last 2.5 years, 3 years, is to lift up the conversation of voter suppression, because even though Republicans are promulgating it now, from Reconstruction through the fact that it was Democrats, and at the inception of this nation, it was the Federalists. So the party only matters in terms of who has the power to block others from being able to participate. But we've got to see this not as a partisan fight between Democrats and Republicans. It's not. This is a fight between Americans and Republicans, between democracy and the attempt to unravel it. This is a question not of partisanship, but of citizenship. And that means we need people to talk about it, not let it go deaf, do not let it go silent, keep lifting it up. We need to support organizations in each of these states that are doing the work to mitigate these new laws as they pass. And we have to demand federal action to protect the right to vote, because no matter who you are and who you vote for, if you break democracy, you break it for everyone. And if they're not coming for you now, you are on the list.
Do you worry, Stacy, about the fact that you are an avowed partisan, making an argument that is really bipartisan? Really, it's about everyone. Do you worry about whether those who are maybe less seen as partisan need to jump in to make this argument about voter suppression, to sort of bring, I suppose, credibility among those who sort of have this knee-jerk feeling that that the effort is really to register Democrats?
Absolutely. I mean, my urgency and my volubility on this is that I can't wait for others to do it. And there are good people who've been fighting these battles for years, but they don't have the platform or the microphone that I have. They can't command the attention that I can command. My goal is to make you focus on me so you can hear it, and then send you to stopjimcrow2.com so you can read about all the other groups that are doing this work. But during my time as Democratic leader, I was the minority leader. So I was the leader of the Democrats in the House. It was in my title that I could not get anything done without the majority's help. It was minority leader. They didn't want me to have any illusions. And I was really good at that job because I never set aside the fact that I was the leader of Democrats, but wherever I could, I worked to make certain that both parties were doing good. And it worked. I was a very effective leader. I don't I don't abandon, or more importantly, I refuse to forfeit my citizenship and my patriotism simply because of my alliance with my political party. Because if I'm doing my job right, my political party is doing its best to make certain that the other side gets to vote. When I fight for voting rights, I'm not saying voting rights for this community or that community. I'm saying I want national laws that guarantee the right to vote for everyone, knowing that no one is guaranteed victory, no one is guaranteed success, and no one is guaranteed that their ideology will win out. But that my responsibility is to fight as hard for a Republican to be able to cast the ballot as I am for a Democrat. Now, I'm going to fight very hard to make sure that the Democrat wins the election, but never to game the process to impede the ability of anyone to have a voice and have a say.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Stacey, have you read any political books that you think are a must read?
So Robert Caro, his compendium on Lyndon Baines Johnson is amazing. I said it earlier, and I want to talk about for a second why I love this, not only LBJ, but why I love Robert Caro. LBJ was someone who, by his own admission, was racist, but also had this redemption and transformation. And what I love about Robert Caro's treatment of his life is this architecture that I think we need in the 21st century, where we have to acknowledge that people will make grotesque and vile mistakes, but that does not diminish their humanity, and it does not eliminate their capacity for redemption. I refuse to use the very facile phrases that people are using these days, but I do want to say that I believe in a person's right to fix what they have broken, to be better than they were. That doesn't mean that you will always get the access that you once enjoyed, and it doesn't mean people have to forgive you. But I believe that we have to, as a society, agree that redemption is possible, and we've got to create space for it. Because if we don't, we are going to end up with leaders who lie to us about who they are and what they've done. We're going to end up with citizens who abandon their part of the social contract, because why try to be a part of a society that tells you you are permanently forbidden from entry? We are better people when we create spaces for grace, and Robert Caro tells that story better than anyone I've ever read.
He, by the way, shows up in While Justice Speaks. Well, he doesn't, but his books do in a very important way.
I really like him.
I feel like I'm scrutinizing your bookshelves because last year there were so many people who had Robert Caro books on their Zoom shelf behind them. They're certainly always on the shelf. Well, a couple quick things. Someone named Andrea Scott is celebrating her birthday today, and she said that this evening with you is her birthday treat to herself, and she can't wait to read your book.
Oh.
Well, happy birthday, Andrea Scott. I hope you're having a wonderful birthday. And if it matters to you at all, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Andrea. Happy birthday to you.
These are the kinds of things that, like, in a live book signing, you would get to actually see the person face to face and wish them happy birthday. So it's nice to be able to, like, bring some of that energy to a Zoom. Let's see, one more, and let's make it a good one. Let's end it on a book note. Is Avery going to appear in another book? Somebody asked.
Avery, I believe, is going to get to live again and have new adventures. So I haven't quite figured out where and when, but I'm working on it, and we should know pretty soon if someone wants to help her emerge again and save the world. And speaking of which, I just want to say thank you to Community Bookstore for being willing to provide all of the books that tell us how to save the world. And thank you, Stephanie, for doing this, and Ann Curry. Your work and your intentionality about telling stories for others is something that I have admired for a very long time. And this isn't my birthday, Andrea, but it is a gift to me to be able to do this with you. So I just want to say publicly how grateful I am to have been in conversation with you guys.
Well, what a sweet and welcome and thank you. I'm so incredibly grateful. I think that this is a moment. I noticed, Stephanie, we still have a couple more minutes, so I just simply want to say that that really part of what I'm hearing you talk about, and part of what these questions are talking about, to some degree, and even in your book, this is also true. There is this kind of thing about seeing the other. And certainly in my work, I've tried to focus on letting people see the true other in places and cultures and difficulties that they may not recognize in themselves. There's this line from Terence, the Roman playwright, who Dr. Maya Angelou told me about, in which Terence says, I am human, so nothing human is alien to me. Right? So this idea, it seems to be kind of what we need now. And so when you talk about these issues, these ideas, I think a lot of people listening and in our audience and throughout the country really are trying to figure out how we're going to get to this place again. Well, not that we were always there, certainly, but how we can get closer than we are today to this idea of seeing this humanity in each other in a manner that goes beyond all these things, all these limits, all these walls, just as Avery Keene experiences these walls, right? And your book is really kind of about that, and your work is about that. And I'm just riffing, but I wonder what you have to say about that.
One of my favorite parts of Avery's story is the story of Avery and her mom. Her mom, who is addicted to drugs and in and out of recovery, who could so easily be this one-dimensional character, this villain who created not only Avery, but is the catalyst for who she becomes in a very reactive way. And I wanted to make certain that Rita was more than that, because we are so quick sometimes to be reductive. We look for the mistake, and that becomes the whole of who we are, the whole of who a person is. And the work I do, the reason I will fight for a Republican or insert political party here to be able to vote, is because I've got to believe that we can make choices that are for our common benefit, and that we are not wholly defined by single choices that we make. But at the same time, I think it's important to explore the complexity and to talk about the places where people make mistakes and the disagreements, which is why I'm a Democrat and not a Republican, and why I will fight on the partisan battlefield. But what I want to do in my work, what I want to do in my writing, is make the field broad enough that more of us can be there. More of us can engage and enjoy. And I'll say this at the end. There's a character who appears in the story who's named after the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House here in Georgia. And I've known him for more than 12 years, almost 15 now. The reason I put him in the book was that at the time I was writing, he and I were friends. I wasn't the leader yet. He wasn't the speaker yet. And we'd been able to work on things. Over time, our policies and our politics have been very, very divergent and clash. But he's my friend. And it was important to me that even though it was going to raise eyebrows, I'm not going to abandon, rebuke my friend because I disagree vehemently with some of the things he does. Because the minute I do that, I see him as alien, and I am the antithesis of what Terence is chiding us to be, which is that our humanity means we've got to create more space for others. And if we do that, we stay on our journey towards better.
And recognize each other's human dignity. Stacy, what a Deep pleasure. Thank you so much. And I guess I'll turn it over to you to say goodbye to everyone, Stephanie. But thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation. It's been a sincere pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And everyone's going to get a copy either in the mail or they're going to come to Community Bookstore to get their signed book, which is like an extra treat after this. So thank you, Stacey. Congratulations on the book. And thank you so much, Anne, for bringing so much warmth and humanity to the conversation.
Bye, guys. Thank you. Bye. Have a good night. And happy birthday, by the way, Andrea.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.